The American Revolution was an interesting time in history. It all started with the French and Indian War. It began with the French expanding their land closer to British lands in America and ended with the French losing all of their land. Britain had racked up a lot of debt in this time. At the end of the war, the British were broke, so their views went right back to the colonies, their money makers. Now, the colonists had been left alone for a while in a practice called salutary neglect, and they were breaking a bunch of rules that the British had set up for them, such as no trading between colonies and living farther west from where the colony's land ended. So they passed the writ of assisting so they could board a colonist boat to see if they were participating in illegal trade, and they also passed the Proclamation of 1763 saying colonists couldn't settle past the Appalachian Mountains. Soon the debt Britain had became more and more encompassing, so they started taxing the colonists first with the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act stated that anything printed on paper would be taxed by the British, everything from birth certificates to death certificates, and the number of taxes grew to include a tax on sugar. They also created the Quartering Act, which made the colonists board British soldiers in their houses against their will. Now the colonists were enraged by this. A rebellious group called Sons of Liberty was soon formed by Sam Adams. The group was made to fight back against the British, often dumping tar and feathers on tax collectors and committing other rebellious acts against the forces.
Britain later passes the Declaratory Act, which repeals the Stamp Act. The colonists were content for a while until the Townshend Act was passed. This act taxed citizens on goods such as glass, lead, paint, silk, etc. The colonists were sick and tired of the taxes.
John Dickinson had written letters from a Pennsylvania farmer concerning taxes. Within the letter, the difference between internal and external taxes were explained.
The colonists were at their breaking point. All of this conflict had been building up and was now ready to burst. Back in England, the British East India Company was going bankrupt. In order to keep the money that was being earned, Britain passed the Tea Act. This taxed the colonists on tea. It was not intended to hurt the colonists in any way, but they saw it as a punishment. To them, this was the last straw, and they broke. The Sons of Liberty dressed up as Native Americans and, in the middle of the night, dumped large amounts of tea into the Boston harbor. This is known as the Boston Tea Party. The British were enraged and ready to punish the colonists for what they had done. The coercive acts were passed. The colonists had called them the Intolerable Acts. These acts revoked every colony's charter so they were under royal rule, closed Boston Harbor, and reinstated the Quartering Act. The colonists were, once again, being forced to house the redcoats. This relationship between America and Britain was going downhill fast.
Due to the colonists feeling this way, this allows for the First Continental Congress to be made. The First Continental Congress makes the Suffolk Resolve, enabling the colonists to get back at the British in several ways, such as the colonists did not have to pay taxes, encourage boycott of British goods, and for each colony make their own militia for self-defense. The militia was not actually meant for self-defense. The militia was in fact the colonies getting ready to fight the British in order to weaken the British force. Then the formation of the First Continental Congress leads to the battles of Lexington and Concord. William Dawes and Paul Revere both rode into Lexington and Concord to warn Adams and Hancock that the Minutemen were coming. The Minutemen went to Lexington and Concord to retrieve supplies and ammunition. In Lexington, that is where the shot heard around the world was first heard. That one shot is referred as the shot heard around the world because it is considered the first bullet of the American Revolution. Due to loss in Lexington and the win in Concord, these events led to the improvement on the First Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress was vital to the American independence because of how the delegates created both Articles of Confederation and the Declaration of the Necessity for Taking Up Arms. The Articles of Confederation talks about how the people of America settled disputes throughout the colonies. Meanwhile, the Declaration of Necessity for Taking Up Arms talks about how the colonists might fight, which leads to the making of the Olive Branch. The Olive Branch pleads peace between the British and colonists because the colonists don't want to go to war. Breed's Hill is mistakenly known as Bunker's Hill. This is where the king sent his militia to attack the colonists, making the colonists assume the British wanted war. Eventually, everything was at a stalemate until Thomas Paine reminded the colonists why they should fight the British. Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, which also influenced the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was written for 3 reasons: because the British burned down the colonist forts, the British offered freedom to slaves who joined the British side. This was detrimental to the colonists' economy because slaves were often sold and bought for money. The final reason was because King George III hires Hessians, which are German militia, to fight the British and to kill or fight the American and colonists. This political cartoon relates to the American Revolution because this shows the British wanting to control the colonists, but the colonists are pulling back against the British. This cartoon also shows how the British are controlling the colonists like puppets due to how the strings are tied to their noses. Within this cartoon, you can see the British guy has a whip which could inflict pain upon the colonists when they don't do something the British like, as seen above with the colonist in the yellow shirt and the hat raised, teasing the British guy. According to the British at the time, we know that the main reason for the British going to the New World was mercantilism, and the colonists were a huge part of the British economy. Thus, in the political cartoon, we can see the British guy crippled because the colonists were boycotting the British goods, making the British economy go down. This second political cartoon relates to the American Revolution because this shows how the colonists were protesting the intolerable/coercive acts because the colonists did not want to pay the taxes the British were forcing them to pay. Within this picture, you can see the colonists with their signs raised saying no in whatever tea act they are protesting, and the loyalists very clearly, which are to the side. The loyalists are those who are on the side protesting against the taxes, watching those who are protesting. Meanwhile, those who are the colonists are those protesting those taxes with their signs raised. The third and final political cartoon relates to the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution due to mainly the Declaration of Independence. This relates to the Declaration of Independence because we can see the woman reading the first few lines of the Declaration. We can also tell this relates to the American Revolution because the Declaration is what the Americans used to claim they were independent from the British. This cartoon shows how the ideas between those who are loyal and those who are wanting to break free vary. We can see this by the guy not looking very happy about the Declaration while the woman is very excited to see this Declaration. We hope you enjoy our project.